to vibrate? Yes, no, no good?
Okay.
Hello?
Yours isn't.
All right, tonight is in, for the, I always guess for the hockey, finals are going on or something. Tonight is the hat trick night. We have 3 meetings tonight. The first is, a special presentation, and then, the Community Redevelopment Agency Board will meet for 1 hour till 7, and then we'll have the city council meeting at 7. Cots will be provided, no, I'm not gonna do that. But the first thing I'd like to do, the first order of business is a presentation to County Commission, Mary Boleyn Lewis, and I'd just like to come down and say some things. Welcome to Satellite Beach, City Council.
I heard of that place.
I'd just like to say a few things. First of all, Mary is here for one reason with Jack and Ernie, who instrumented the transfer of Pelican Beach and Hightower Beach from state, county, city to the city of Satellite Beach. And with the county, and I will tell you, I went to the county commission meetings twice, and each time greeted very, very respectfully and warm by the whole county commission. And I think that was based on Mary's presentation to them. The other thing, we went right to the front of the line. So 9 o'clock, 9:15, whereas other cities are, there for a long time. But I would like to thank Mary and Jack and Ernie for that, but also, if you don't know, Mary represents us well on the Space Coast, was at the Space Congress, and travels to China and around the world representing us. We do have a small presentation for you, but before I give that to you, it's just a letter signed by me. But I would like to say, I know that you did not make the barbecue on the 13th. So, and I knew that you weren't going to be there, so I did ask him to put in the bag a hamburger and a hot dog. So it's been on the table since the 13th, but enjoy, Jack, sorry, not one for you. Definitely not one for you. So I hope you enjoyed that, but thank you so much. God bless you, and everything best of luck in the future. Please.
My turn to talk?
Oh, and are we giving? Oh, we need you to sign this too. At the picnic, we all signed this.
Oh, how beautiful.
We wanted to make it official that you really gave us the beach. So, and Howard's on this, so we
And on
would
the
have.
back is the title that I decided over to the
Yes,
land.
your house, and thank you. But if you guys could sign this, maybe on after Mary gives her speech, and I'll take this. And you want to take that? Thank you. Go ahead.
I get the microphone. Thank you so much. And I want to say that partnership is everything. For those of you who might not know me, I have been on Sherwood Avenue for 20 years, Satellite Beach. And as my late Bob Boleyn had said, that I was even blessed to be the first witch of Satellite Beach when he was mayor. So I have had a long partnership with Satellite Beach. That's why it's so precious to me. And just to be able to take the park, which we have had and you have cared for and you've loved, and to say it's finally yours. You've adopted it, we've signed the papers. So we're very proud of that. And I'd like to introduce Jack, who is my parks director. He was very instrumental in this also. And if you would like to say a few words.
Yeah.
Now bring the cops out.
I know.
I'm excited. I've been involved with the city of Satellite Beach since I started with Brevard County Parks and Rec in January of 1970. I started when I was 7, if anybody's wondering. But the involvement with your city manager and your Parks Director here. And going through the lease opportunities that we had. I have said, and I think it even came up on the 13th, that I've developed a bucket list. I'm in my 40 plus year with the county right now, and there's a number of things I would like to see happen. Number one on the list was the transfer of these two parks. So with the assistance of our county commissioner and Ernie, our natural resources director, we accomplished that. Obviously, it was a good joint partnership, and I thank the council and Mr. Crowley and Carrie. Thank you.
I concur. When I got elected 6 years ago now as county commissioner, after, as I said, my late Bob was the mayor, that was one of the things that we wanted to do as a joint partnership over in Satellite Beach to get that done. Now, the next thing I want to take a moment of your time before we pull the cots out is that all of you who work in public service, you know that you want to be able to walk away after your term is done and could say you accomplished something. And so what my goal is when I step down, when I'm done with my election and my term, is to say that I was the commissioner who kept on giving. So tonight, I want to talk to you about giving some more to Satellite Beach. We have a water situation, a stormwater situation. I know that you're working very hard on getting that accomplished. So I brought Ernie with me as my backup, who is my director of stormwater. And I would like to, on your behalf, go to the Board of County Commissioners and ask for $100,000 to give to Satellite Beach to accomplish part of that stormwater project. Would you accept it if I could get it? If I could have Ernie just take a couple moments of your time to explain more what this $100,000 will be doing.
Couple minutes.
So I shouldn't bring my speech up. To be fair, she was very diplomatic, but to be truthful, this partnership is mutually beneficial. If you all are receptive to that process, we, as the county, we have this wonderful unfunded mandate. Take it for what it is, to deal with some water quality issues in our shared lagoon. It benefits us to contribute and partner with you all as it relates to meeting our water quality mandates as well. It's a mandate that we're all stuck with. You all are very fortunate in the 2.5 square miles, is that what you have? Where a lot of work has been done to address the stormwater issues in a very historically built area where stormwater was not a consideration. You all have worked diligently to do retrofits, and you're one of the very few communities that actually have addressed your first 5-year mandate through what you have actually put on the ground and what you committed to for the next 5 years. And this is one of those projects. We need some help reaching our mandate, but it's not as easy to go into areas and retrofit. By us being able to partner with you with this $100,000 helps us as well, and helps you all accomplish your goals to address a multifaceted project. This is the Cassia Phase 3 that we're talking about. So, you know, I've spoken with the commissioner, and they obviously has to go to the board for some, you know, bureaucratic procedures. I'm not very good at those, but they're there. We have to deal with interlocals and that kind of stuff. But it would be a great partnership. So it's my hope that we can work towards that end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And let me see, any comments?
What's the total? Total of the project or total of the project?
The total project's about 1.15 million. The city's match is about 40% of that. In Brevard County, it'll be between $400,000 and $500,000, the local match. And Brevard County will have given us $285,000 of that local match. They previously gave us $185,000 for the complete replacement of the pedway along Cassia. It will be moved away from the road, so it'll be much safer for the pedestrians and students that use that pathway.
Okay.
Anything that you'd like to say?
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner Bolen, for getting us to the beach.
You're welcome.
Unfortunately, I'm still stuck maintaining the beach, but that's another story altogether. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
For this part,
Hey, good evening, everyone. Again, I'd like to welcome you to the Community Redevelopment Agency Board meeting. The time is approximately 6:15. The date is May 2nd, 2012. And I'd like to call on Board Member Dean for this moment of silence.
Moment of silence. And the pledge? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. On the agenda tonight, we have CRA 101. We had scheduled 55 minutes from this. We were going to start at 6:05. At 6:15. We'll go till 7:10. All right, and in that time with the presentation and board questions, and if we have time for audience questions, and I do know that we have another meeting scheduled tomorrow night at 6, where you will entertain citizen input on the redevelopment plan. So there will be ample opportunity tonight, tomorrow night, and one more, charrette, on the 23rd of May, for also input. So I don't want to take any more of your time. Mike?
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, before we begin the CRA 101, Richard Sala from the consulting firm would like to give council a brief update on activities to date and provide the lead-in for the CRA 101.
Thank you. Hi, Richard.
thank you, Mark. Hello, board members, not council board members.
Correct.
How are you today?
Thanks.
We've had the pleasure today of spending most of the day with your city staff and with the stakeholders, residents, business owners in the city, some of the elected officials and past elected officials. The component that we were doing was basically gathering information from the stakeholders that will help mold where the redevelopment agency needs to go and the plan. And tomorrow we'll be doing that again all day, and then tomorrow night we will finish with the public meeting, which will be out at the Pelican Beach Clubhouse at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Also spent part of the day meeting with some of the city employees and officials and with your city manager to look at some of the resources and staffing levels that you have and any recommendations where we might be able to help them with some of the constraints that you're under now and how to better serve the public on some of those responsibilities that need to be undertaken. With that, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to put us through the little workshop. So thank you for everybody's help today.
Thank you very much. As all of you have known my visiting before, I'm Jeff Horace with Calvin Giordano. What we have for you tonight is kind of a real basic presentation on CRAs. A little bit on creation, which I'm going to go through really quickly since you've already created yours. A little bit about what needs to be in your redevelopment plan, what a CRA can and can't do. So I'm going to jump right into it. Again, it's a very basic presentation. We're going to go through some very simple concepts. Quickly, how does this come about? Well, in 1969, the Redevelopment Act of 1969 was passed by the legislature. It became Chapter 163, Part 3 of the Florida statutes. That is the statute which governs CRAs. Everything CRAs can do is contained in that statute. As of the last review, which I believe the last time I actually checked was about 6 months ago, there are 202 CRA districts registered within the, well, it's not the Florida Department of Community Affairs now, but it's the Special Districts Office of the Department of Economic Opportunity. That office tracks all special districts in the state. You can find their database of special districts online, so if you want to see what other CRAs exist, you find the Special Districts Office, that'll have that entire list there. Currently, it's the only form of tax increment districts in widespread use in the state of Florida. There are some other opportunities to create increment districts that the legislature has created over the last few years. However, none of them have really been effective and they're just not in use. CRAs are the only type of tax increment district in widespread use. CRAs may be created by a city or a county. The county cannot create one in a city unless it has the city's permission, but counties can create them. Cities can also create them within their borders. If you are within a charter county, as we are now, you need the county's permission and delegation of those authorities under 163 to create a CRA. If you are in a non-charter county, of which we are not in one of those, then the city has the power under statutes to go ahead and do it. The state is not involved in the creation of a CRA. There is no step to go up to the state and say, here's our plan, will you adopt it? This is a purely local effort. Anytime a CRA is moving forward with anything, it is a local effort. The first thing that happens, and a step that you all have already taken, is creating a finding of necessity. That is, the governing body makes a declaration that there are slum and/or blighting conditions that exist within the defined area within your jurisdiction. Again, you have already done that a number of years ago. It's not something you ever go back to. It's done, it's over, you move forward from that point. Definitions of slum and blight are contained in the statute, chapter 163, part 3. There are a number of different things. I'm not going to go through slum because there is one of those 202 CRAs in the state of Florida that use slum as its justification. The majority of CRAs in the state use blight. Now, blight is not what you might think it is, that you have these horrible, terrible conditions and that there's some housing project that's falling apart. It's more about the conditions that impede quality development, quality enhancements to the quality of life in a community, real estate values showing no appreciable increase. Mind you, all these were written, of course, before the real estate collapse. So that's kind of interesting. Faulty lot layout in relation to accessibility, adequacy, usefulness. That's one that comes about a lot now, especially in a community like this, where your commercial districts have some smaller lots that modern users wouldn't want to build upon. They're just too small, they're too close to a road, they're too close to home. So it's one of those things we see a lot of. That there's deterioration of site and other improvements. And again, this isn't buildings are falling down kind of thing. These are problems in making things happen. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. Again, this is a step you've already undertaken. But it's important to remember why you started this, that you had these conditions that existed, and that you said, we've got some issues we want to address. The creation of the CRA is then created by the governing board through a resolution accepting the finding of necessity and a resolution further declaring that there's a need for redevelopment. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but something you all have done already. That's happened here, you've created your CRA, but again, important to know where it comes from. The governing body adopts an ordinance talking about who the board of commissioners of the CRA is. Prior to creation, notices must go to all the taxing authorities, so before you did anything here, all the taxing authorities that control some sort of levy of tax within the area to be the CRA were told about. This is not something they didn't know about, they were told. And notices published in a newspaper. So again, the public's out there, notices out there, and not, again, to continue to beat this horse, but something you've done already. You have several CRA board options. I know you recently kind of went through some of these and expanding your board, but your board either can be your governing body sitting as the CRA board. It can be an independent board of no less than 5 or no more than 9 persons appointed for staggered terms. If the governing body consists of 5 members, or the CRA board can be them plus 2. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Or by interlocal agreement between the governing body and one or more taxing authorities, representatives of the taxing authorities may be members of the CRA board. That's the newest provision that came out of some of the counties being concerned about how their money was being spent and that they wanted some representation on these boards. So that was a bit of a compromise to make sure that there was potential in a CRA for them to be, have representation. The CRA board is subject to the sunshine laws and the code of ethics as any elected official in the state is, even though they're appointed officials. And independent CRA board members would have a term of 4 years. They can only be removed for cause or for some violation of law, essentially. The idea being if you have an independent board, you want stability to that board. You don't want that board to shift every time there may be a shift in political power in the governing body. So once they're appointed, they're there for 4 years. If a member of the governing body, the term is concurrent with your term of office. So if your term of office is 2 years, you're on the CRA board for 2 years. If it's 4 years, you're on, so it lasts as long as your term of office lasts. The chair and the vice chair are selected by the governing body. The CRA board itself does not select who its chair or vice chair is. And I believe we had a short discussion on this when we were here once before. It is the council that selects who the chair and vice chair of the CRA board are. That's an important one to know. One of those things actually a lot of communities kind of miss out on. They forget that that's in statute, and over time, they sort of waver back and forth. There is nothing in the statute that talks about the term of a chair and vice chair. It can be as long or as short as the governing body wishes it to be. Members, again, like I said, can only be removed for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or misconduct in office. You can't go, we don't like that person anymore, get them off. The community redevelopment plan. This is the important part because this is the step we're in now in modifying the plan. But really what happens at creation as you move into this, the CRA writes and recommends a community redevelopment plan for approval by the governing body. It's not the governing body that is responsible for that recommendation. That actually comes from the CRA to say, okay, here's the plan we recommend for you to approve. When you modify a plan, which is essentially the process we're going through now, the modification must be recommended by the CRA board. The council can't go, we're going to change the plan. It has to be recommended by the CRA board first. Then it starts to move through the process. Ultimately, the decision on approving or not approving rests with the governing body, in your case, the city council. But it is not the group that can initiate that. That's important to know. The plan outlines the projects and programs that will be undertaken by the CRA to eliminate the slum or blighting conditions that you found in that original finding of necessity over a defined period of time. I say not to exceed 40 years. There's been changes in statute over the last 10 years. When the statute first came to being, it was 30 years. Then it was 30 years with the ability to extend for another 30 years. Then it went to 40 years. And there keeps being discussion of more changes to that. Right now, I believe in the time frame that you created yours, you're at a 30-year plus the potential for an additional 30 years, is where I believe you are. I can't say with certainty, but I believe that's where you are. The contents of a redevelopment plan. It must contain a legal description of the redevelopment area. This is the first place that has to be. We'll make sure, certainly, when we're doing your plan, that we have that in yours. There must be a diagram and text describing certain things. Open space and street layout. Approximate number of dwelling units. Property intended for public parks, recreation, anything that's really going to be in the public realm. There needs to be a diagram showing where this space is and talking about it in some form of text to describe it. So that's an important part of the document. And one of those things that a lot of communities miss, one of the newest things, is for people to start writing these things and everybody's missing this stuff. Very important legally, not necessarily always relevant to your projects and programs, but absolutely must be there. Some additional things that need to be there, limitations on type, size, height, number of proposed uses of buildings. Normally what communities do, and it's something that our larger discussion will include, will be they'll just refer to the comprehensive plan and the regulations within the city's comprehensive plan rather than trying to make anything radical or different. Say the CRA will support those that are in the comprehensive plan. Can't say for certain that's what will happen in your plan. We haven't gotten enough input yet, but that's a generally accepted way of moving forward with it. Again, property intent for public improvements. The document really needs to contain all those ideas of what's going to happen on public land and be publicly funded. So that's why these documents come into place. A detailed statement of projected costs of redevelopment. Now remember, we'll make a projection on what something will cost 20 years from now. So it may not be that accurate, but we're going to do our best when we put those things forward to give you a good idea of what projects or programs that the community has said they want will cost over time. And then, of course, provide a time certain for completing all this. It shouldn't be dangling out that we're done when we're done. There should be a talk, and of course, that discussion will be, when's a good time frame? When do we think things will be done? Does this go to the extent that the law allows? Does it not? Does it happen sooner or later? All those things will be taken care of as we talk to the public and get their input on what they'd like to see. The adoption and approval of a redevelopment plan, very similar in your case to the creation of a new one, but it's the CRA board must submit a recommended plan with their comments to the local planning agency, your planning and zoning board. The statute does not require this step for a modification, which is again what you're doing. It's really good practice in any community I go to, I say, do that step. Because it's that group that determines compliance of the plan with your comprehensive plan. Required when you first create a plan, statute is silent about doing it on a modification, which again is what we're doing now, but it is a best practice and the best way to go because it protects you, that everybody saw it and that board had the opportunity to say, yes, this meets our comp plan. You can proceed with it. They will give forward any comments that they have, go back to the CRA board. The CRA board does or doesn't make changes and then forwards those things to the governing body, the city council. Now, it'll be interesting since most of the CRA board is the city council. You'll see it multiple times, but we're going to treat you like you're a different board because that's the reality. The CRA is a separate and distinct entity. It is not the city. There are instances where, of course, we all come to this building to deal with the CRA, or we are sitting here in the council chambers as the CRA board's here. People get confused with that, but legally, the CRA is not the city. It is its own entity. So that's another point to really keep in mind when we're moving forward with these things. There's things that you have to do in a non-chartered county where the non-chartered county gets the opportunity to make comments about things. Again, I'm not going to go through that since that's not the case here and it's really not relevant to what we're talking about. So we'll just jump a bit. Some of the things the CRA can do, and we'll be talking with folks about this when we're seeking input on the types of things they should do, it's what can it do. The CRA can acquire and hold property. Its job is not to hold property indefinitely. You really want to get these things back on the tax roll. So you don't want to create a situation where you buy something and holding on to it forever. I know there's some land here that the CRA owns, and because of economic conditions, they're kind of sitting there right now. We'll give you some ideas in the planning through the input of the public, how we can get you to move forward with those and get those back on the tax rolls and get some good uses on those that are beneficial to the community. The CRA can demolish buildings. It can't just go on your property, sir, and say, we don't like your building, we're gonna get rid of it. But it has the power to demolish buildings. It can dispose of property at fair value. This is different from what a city can do. It's one of the few powers left that a CRA has that a city or county doesn't have. It can choose to dispose of property at fair value versus what the city has to do, which is fair market value. The city's disposing of the land needs to get assessments and appraisals on the land, and it has to sell at a set range within those appraisals. The CRA can determine that there's additional value that they're getting that brings up the fair value. You can determine that you own a piece of land and it would be beneficial to have an ice cream stand on the land, just for example here. You can say that having that ice cream stand is worth $40,000 to the city. And therefore, we're going to sell a piece of property that's worth $41,000 to this person who will develop the ice cream stand for $1,000. Because we've determined that there's a value of $40,000 having that use. Whereas if the city was selling that land, it would need to get the appraisals and sell at the appraised value. So you're taking into account some economic benefit and assigning some value to it that allows you to not get that cash value, but to get value in some other way. That's, again, one of the few powers left with the CRA that's different from its parent city. Can develop property. The CRA can technically be the developer. If you have a piece of property, they can say, you know, it would be great if there was an office building here. Let's build one. Not necessarily the best way of going about it. It can tie up your money, but if that's something you'd like to do or something that moves your program forward, you have the power to do that. Carrying out a voluntary or compulsory repair or rehab of buildings. It's essentially that the CRA has the right to do some code enforcement work. Again, not something that we overly recommend you do, but sometimes if you're in a district that has a lot of code enforcement issues, it's helpful to have additional code enforcement personnel within your CRA over and above what the city's providing to make sure that those issues get addressed. Again, a power, and just because these powers exist doesn't mean that you need to exercise them or that every community does exercise them. Has the power to install, construct, and repair streets, parks, utilities, playgrounds, and other improvements. You can go in and you've experienced some of this. Some of your oceanfront land has been through the CRA. Fully within its power to do that, to provide those recreational amenities that add to your community that way. Solicit proposals for development or redevelopment. Do a developer RFP. You own a piece of land, and even if you don't own it, you can do this. You can solicit developers. You can put out a document that says, hey, developers, we have a piece of land where there's a development opportunity. We'd like to see you do this sort of thing. We're going to take bids on it. We'll move forward. Now, it's possible to do it on land you don't own. Of course, that somebody has to acquire the land. I'm aware of some situations where owners have been willing to participate if the city's going to go out and solicit for the developer, where they've already negotiated with the CRA the sales price. And you can include that in the RFP. What that does, it just means that you don't have to buy the land in order for that to happen, but you've already established a price, so anybody who's responding to the RFP knows what the cost of the land is going to be. And there's the opportunity for the CRA to write down that cost through the fair value issue. You can write that down, pay part of it, or include that value in switching. There's some really innovative things that can happen there. The CRA can close, vacate, plan, replan streets, sidewalks, or other places. Now, we say they can close, they can't close without the permission of the owner of that, which in most instances is going to be the city. Some instances it may be the county or the state. They don't have the power essentially to close it. You have the power to be a petitioner to close it, but you don't own it, so you can't do that. But it does have that limited power there. Enter into contracts and agree to appropriate conditions, including but not limited to certain. It's an entity unto its own. It has the right to negotiate a contract to do the sort of things that it has the power to do. That's essentially what this portion says. Is we have the right to enter into a contract as its own entity. The CRA can be an entity signing the contract. Can petition for changes to land use zoning as well as to different laws and regulations. Again, what this authorizes the CRA to do, if they feel that there's some land use controls that aren't appropriate, to petition the council for a change. They can't make the change. That power still vests with the city council. But they have the right to go out, get a study done, or do whatever needs to be done to come forward and be the petitioner for that. It could. It could. Streetscaping. This is one of the things most CRAs will find themselves doing is some sort of public landscaping and pavers and those sort of things. You have the right to do that. Private property improvement grants. This is something that's a staple of CRAs. One of the things that I think we're going to talk a whole lot more with the public about and with you all when we're moving forward is this something you want to continue with? What sort of goals should there be if you're going to continue with a property improvement program? To make sure, one of the most important things in these is if you're going to give a grant, make sure you're getting something for it. You shouldn't be giving a grant because you can. There should be some conditions and things that people are meeting so that your money is going to purchase something essentially, that there's some give back on something. Acquisition of key parcels of land to do certain things, planning activities, again, it's kind of a little over a redundancy of some of the things we've already said, economic development. More and more CRAs are moving into business incentives. As our economy has changed, some of them have changed from we need to get developers here to build things to we need to get jobs and businesses here. So we act more as an economic development agency. That's a potential. Promotional activities. This is an interesting one, actually. The State Auditor General's Office has said CRA should not be doing this because it's not contained in the statute that says you can do this. There have been some interesting discussions back and forth with the Auditor General's Office. They have said if it's not mentioned in the statute, you can't do it. And we've said, no, read the statute. It says, here's a list of some of the things you can do. It's not an exhaustive list. For some reason, they're stuck on their side of it. But it's something that most CRAs do, and they have continued to do even after the Auditor General has said, we don't think you can do that. That's not out of the realm of things that should be done. Borrowing money. Of course, the CRA can borrow money with the approval of the governing body. They can't decide to borrow money and go do it. They decide to borrow money and go, City Council, can we borrow money? Is that okay with you? Because ultimately, if the CRA goes out of existence, that liability falls to the city. If they're still dead, it becomes the city's debt. So that's why they come back and ask. And that's very important because there's multiple opportunities now for the public to know what's gonna happen and for everybody to have a say if there's gonna be a debt burden on the CRA. The borrowing can be in basically any different form people could borrow it. You can go to a bank, you can do a bond. Most CRAs have not gone to bond because what they're borrowing is not large enough. Usually try to find a bank loan or some other form of credit. Line of credits are very popular with CRAs because you can have some ability to have debt available to you and you can jump at opportunities and not have to go through the lengthy appropriation to borrow money. Again, notice needs to be given to the taxing authorities and the public needs to be notified. So this isn't something that just pops up on an agenda one day. So again, the public has opportunities to talk about this when it happens. Repayment period cannot exceed the life of the CRA. Now, I'm not going to tell you that's a finite statement. There's ways to structure that so that after the retirement of the CRA, the debt becomes the city's. If that's something that wants to be done by the city and the CRA, it's an option out there. You have to structure your debt a certain way. It's a possibility, again, not certainly saying it's anything you should do, but the option exists. What a CRA cannot do, this is the important stuff, can't pay for general government operating expenses. Now, the thing that comes up is that these are words from the statute. It cannot pay for general government operating expenses. What is a general government operating expense? That's the thing that's undefined. The best way I have usually defined that to people is start with one question, which is, if the CRA didn't exist, who'd be doing this? Would it be done? Would it not be done? Would it be done right now? Or would it wait several years to happen? That's a good base to start. If it's something that, also, who's doing it outside the CRA district? This comes into play a lot of times nowadays with landscaping. CRAs install landscaping, and when things were very good, a CRA would immediately turn the landscaping maintenance responsibilities over to the city. This is not our job. We put it in, now it's yours. Well, more and more cities are saying, well, we can't afford that. If you're going to put it in, you have to maintain it. So the question is, when did it go in? Who's maintaining? Was there an agreement to start with? If two projects went in 5 years ago, one inside the CRA, one outside, and 4 years ago, the city said, CRA, you maintain that one inside. We're going to keep maintaining the one outside. You maintain the one inside. I would suggest that you are then violating the general government operating expense provision there, because you've said it's in the CRA, so you do it. Outside, we're going to do it, but inside, you do it. It's your problem. So those are the sort of things you want to ask yourself when moving forward with general government operating expenses. There are a number of communities that will charge their city will charge their CRA for staff time. And clearly you have some city staff that will occasionally work on a CRA project. It is appropriate to charge the CRA for that time. Where cities have run into trouble is they just say, okay, well, the public works director directs crews that maintain something in the CRA, that's the CRA's responsibility, so we're just going to charge 50% of his time. The Auditor General has looked at some of those in a number of cities, and they've said, you know what, you can't give us a flat rate on that. You need to give us a justification. And what they really want to see is a time card. They want to know that there were people out there, and they're billed at this rate, and they were out for 7 hours, so the CRA get charged at 7 hours times their rate. They don't want you to just go, 15% sounds good. So it's very important if that's something you're going to do, or any other service that the city will charge the CRA for, that it be documented what it is, the time that was put in, and a quality justification for the amount of money. Again, it's technically a separate entity. It would be no different than if the county did something for you and you were reimbursing them for it. You control the CRA in your local realm, but it's a separate entity. So it needs to be a fully justified expense. Again, expenses there must be fully documented. You pay for a project or program outside of the redevelopment area. I will also tell you, not a finite statement also. There are some provisions in the statute that people have interpreted quite broadly recently. It's my personal belief that they were designed for instances when there was traffic concurrency, and if I build something here, I need to fix something in a roadway here, and that could be outside the CRA. There are some really, really broad interpretations. The city of Miami has broadly interpreted this to do some major projects outside of their CRA and have their CRA pay for it. The best advice that it can be given is don't do if you don't have to do it, don't do it, because that raises questions, and it's hard to answer those questions. Why are you doing something outside the CRA? Paid board members, I'm sorry to tell you this, but y'all can't receive extra payment because you're sitting here as the CRA board. Sorry.
We make too much money on it.
On the previous slide, you had something about legal notices in newspapers and getting in touch with people. Our Florida Today is down to like 3 pages a day and it's about to go under. What is legally notification gonna be if that happens?
That's gonna be a really interesting question that the state legislature is gonna have to answer, because it
Because
dictates,
it's the only newspaper.
it dictates what's appropriate advertisement. There is a section in the statute that says, here's what you do. You must publish in a newspaper of general circulation. And they've been wrestling with some of those issues. I know there was some effort by the cities and the counties this year to come forward and saying that publishing on a website was enough. The legislature did not approve that, as far as I know. But this is a problem that will be wrestled with in the future. I couldn't give you an answer.
Okay. But there would be, it would necessitate some sort of notification somehow.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, the CRA cannot create laws or regulations. They can advocate for the creation of the laws or regulations, but they cannot create them. They cannot regulate land use in any way. Again, they can advocate for the regulation of land use, but they cannot do it themselves. And then utilize the power of eminent domain. That used to exist for CRAs. CRAs used to be able to use the power of eminent domain, but several years ago, that got wiped away. Now, I would caution you also, if you read the statute, be careful because there is still reference to eminent domain there. However, elsewhere in statute is a provision that says you cannot do it for redevelopment purposes. Unfortunately, they didn't put that in the redevelopment statute, they put it elsewhere, so people still read that statute and think that you have that power. You do not have that power to eminent domain. And one of the most important things to remember is any project or program the CRA wishes to undertake must be outlined in its community redevelopment plan. That redevelopment plan is essentially, your guidance and your roadmap. Doesn't have to be so specific as to say, I'm gonna replace this podium with one exact same size, and it's gonna have a black top, and it's gonna be 4'6". But if you say, I'm gonna replace furniture, and this is not an allowable expense, it's just an example. I'm gonna replace the furniture in the council chambers. That would cover replacing the podium with something that's 4.5 foot tall with a red top. So it needs to be something that's clear, and certainly advocates have said the best way to handle these things, when you have an item on your agenda that talks about an expenditure, have something in that agenda backup that says where the plan allows the expenditure. It's great to have a line on the agenda that gives you a page reference. This is being expended because on this page, it says what we're doing here. That's a great way to ensure that you're following your plan, and if an auditor ever comes forward and looks at the document immediately, well, why'd you justify this? Well, let's see. It says on page 34, here's what we're gonna do. They just look at that, look at the redevelopment plan, okay, I understand it. Again, the Auditor General came through 5-6 years ago, audited about 18-19 CRAs. That was one of the big findings, is that things that people were doing were not justified by the redevelopment plan. And in some instances they were, but it wasn't really clear, and nobody could find the documentation to say there was a discussion, we talked about the plan, we made the determination that these words meant we could do this, and here's why. So again, the more of that you can do, the safer you are, the clearer it is to anybody why you've done something. And certainly, any member of the public wants to know, have you done this legally, is it good, is it right, where in the plan does it say it? So give them that information up front. Nobody will ever be able to say you're hiding something when you've done that already, that's great. Again, even if it's allowed by statute, it has to be in the plan. And if it's not in the plan, here's the real important part, you can't do it. If it's in the plan, you don't have to do it, but if it's not in the plan, you can't do it. You can modify a plan. You can always add something in. It's not a good practice to modify your plan because you have a project you want to do. And a project shouldn't modify your plan. You should modify your plan because it's a good idea, because something's changed in your environment, and it's a good idea to change the plan. You shouldn't have a project that comes forward and go, well, we need to amend the plan so this project can happen. Now, it may be the case that that project is something larger that should be The plan should be changed to allow that type of thing. But it shouldn't be changed, you really should be questioning, am I changing it just because of that one project? That's not necessarily a good practice. Quickie, the redevelopment trust fund, that's where we put the redevelopment funds. Governing body, when you create it, and you've done this already, creates a redevelopment trust fund by ordinance. Funds allocated are used to carry out activities in the redevelopment plan. The funds can be obtained from donations, grants, allocations from the governing body, increment revenues, the increment financing we'll all talk about. The TIF is usually what goes into a redevelopment trust fund, but there are those other potentials. They all exist. If you get a grant, you put the money in the trust fund. Again, the city can choose to allocate money to the CRA, not something at this advanced time that you would probably do. That usually comes into play when the CRA is brand new and has no money and it needs to function, so the governing body will give it some money to operate. That's where that usually comes into play. Quickie, what is tax increment revenue? The thing, that TIF thing we all talk about, what really is it? It's increases in taxes collected by certain taxing authorities over what is collected in an established base year. And that's remitted by those authorities to the CRA for the purposes of financing redevelopment activities, which are outlined in its plan. Right off the bat, I can tell you, in chapter 163, part 3, it says school boards are not taxing authorities. So the school board does not pay to a CRA. Districts that levy taxes in more than one county do not pay. Entities which have property taxes are only revenue source, except mosquito control districts. I'm not really sure how they got that. Library districts, neighborhood improvement districts, metropolitan transportation authorities. The one to watch out for sometimes, and if I'm not mistaken, you all only collect from the county and the city. So those don't really come into play. But it's one of those things, again, if somebody reads the statute and get the question, you should know all these people are exempt. You're only getting from those two entities now. There became a problem at one time down in Broward County where a new taxing authority was established and nobody knew what to do with it. Well, the reality was it was established and it needed to pay. So that became a little issue. It was a Children's Services Council too. So it was about children and taxes, and it's still actually an ongoing issue. But it's important if somebody's coming forward to create a new taxing district to remember that the CRA is there and they may have to pay if they're not careful with how they do things. The simple diagram for how a CRA is collected, and I don't want to jump up right in front of it and point to it, but really what it is you have two examples here. In 2010, for example, remember you set on a base year. Let's, for argument's sake, say the base value of our CRA was $100,000, and the taxes that collectively all of the property owners there paid was $200. Under that instance, the city and the county received that full of the $200 in tax payments. Now we move forward 5 years. Now that property is worth $150,000 and they're paying $300 in taxes on it. So it's got an increase of $50,000 in value. Those owners are paying $100 more in taxes than they paid 5 years previously. So that extra $100, the 200 plus the 100 is the 300, but the extra 100 is remitted by those agencies to the redevelopment trust fund. So it gets $100, and that's really simplistic. There's a formula for retention of certain, but it's a simplistic argument here. So that $100 is then placed in the redevelopment trust fund and is available to the CRA to use to undertake activities outlined in its plan. Again, outlined in its plan. It's not in the plan, you can't do it. If it's not in the money's in the trust fund, it can only pay for things in the plan. If it's not in the plan, you can't do it. So if it's in the trust fund, you can't use it to pay for things that aren't in the plan. I like to beat that up a bit.
Yeah, can we just let Jeff finish and then,
And we're getting real close to the end here. Okay. Of course, now I gotta. Hate when this happens. All right, money in the trust fund may be expended for projects, and the statute goes into specifically what it can be expended on. Of course, it must be in the plan, but these things include administrative expenses. You can pay for a staff, plans, financial analysis, surveys, acquisition of property in the CRA, site preparation, relocation of occupants, repayment of borrowed funds, development of land. The CRA owns, purchases property, and it has to move people. It's responsible to move them. It needs to have a plan on how it's going to address that. So that's an important thing to note. So that's why relocation of occupants is an allowable expense to the redevelopment trust fund. Now I'm in a world where this just doesn't, there we go. Another really, really, really important thing to remember. A CRA cannot have an undesignated fund balance at the end of the year. It's not allowed to just say, well, we can spend this money, so let's just roll it over. It has to do one of these four things. When there's money left on the last day of the fiscal year, it must return it to the taxing authorities which paid it in the appropriate proportion from how much each paid into it. Or it can be used to reduce debt, or it can be deposited in an escrow account for reducing debt at a later time. So if I have money left over this year, I'm putting an escrow account to pay next year's debt, that which is due next year, not new debt. Or it can be appropriated to a specific project contained in the redevelopment plan that will be completed within 3 years. So you can save a limited amount of money. Essentially, you can have it for 4 years before you pay this. You can have it for that first year, and then if you still have it at the end of the year, you have to allocate it to a project that's going to happen within 3 years. That's important to know. There's way too many CRAs that have held on to money way too long. And it always concerns me when I see an audit and it says undesignated fund balance, because technically there's no such thing in a CRA. The accountants like to use that term, so it shows up, but it's important to note that you have to have that money allocated to something on that last day of the fiscal year. Running CRAs, what most people do is there's a resolution that comes before the CRA that says, you know, they're meeting in September, on September 30th, this will happen to the money. And you usually go through that in your budget process. I don't know how exactly how you've done it here before, but that's the way it usually happens. Okay, again, important to note that there can be no undesignated fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. CRA is required each year to submit a report of its activities, including a full financial disclosure to the governing body, and publish in a newspaper. Notice that says it submitted that information. So again, the public has another avenue, although, as you said, getting a little sketchy with newspapers nowadays, but another avenue to be able to view what the CRA has done and how it spent money. Must prepare an audit and submit a copy of the audit to the taxing authorities it collects funds from and to the state of Florida, so the state has on file a copy of your audit for your CRA. That's usually actually roped into the larger audit of your city. It can be a component of that audit. It doesn't have to be a standalone. It often is just part of your city audit. And of course, reporting to the, I apologize again, I have the DCA's Office of Special Districts. That report, unfortunately, is really, send us a check. When you create your CRA, and I'm sure you all have done this, you give them the particulars of your CRA, what the board makeup is, what type of district it is. You send them a map of your district. Then you tell them who the registered officer of your CRA is, so if anybody wants to sue you, they know who to send the notice to. Or any special notice that needs to go to the district goes to that person. And then every year they send you a bill for, I think it's $128 now, and that's pretty much what reporting to the Office of Special Districts is. Why do people have CRAs is a question that comes up often, so this is actually one of the very last slides. It really is a formalized organization that has a set plan. No project the CRA does should be a complete surprise if people have been paying attention. It's in the plan, it's been discussed, you've had public notice of plans being adopted, any change that may happen to a plan. So it is a set plan. It's not taking anybody by surprise. It should have defined goals. Here's what we're going to do, and here's how we expect to do it. It should have that built-in funding. I mean, the tax increment is essentially that. It's the funding for redevelopment. If you don't have a CRA, you run around going, we have a redevelopment project we want to do. How are we going to pay for it? But we don't know. The CRA says we have money to do projects. Which projects do we want to move forward? We write our plan, we have that. It has the annual reporting mechanisms. So again, if a resident wants to know where'd you spend your money, they can get the annual report and see some of these things. It's not going to give you a transaction by transaction report, but it's going to be an overall, if we spent this much on this type of activity, this much on this type of activity, here's where the money came from. Public notifications, again, every one of these steps, there's some notification that's out there. That's good. You know, I don't live in a world that's completely dark. I understand not everybody sits there and combs through the newspaper looking for these notices. Hopefully, there are some better ways in the future with the electronics that exist to make sure notices are even more available to the average person. The really most important thing though with the CRA though is because that state is not involved in it, it's local decisions. You are deciding what's happening with this money in your city. You're not meeting some mandate out of Tallahassee on how to spend it. You're deciding what your community needs and how to spend it there within the confines of the law and the plan that you've already established. So that's what's really key there. I threw this one in real quick. The Florida Redevelopment Association every year has an annual conference where about 300 to 400 people each year get together and talk about redevelopment. It's a great source of information, not only for elected officials and staff, but for folks in the public who want to know more. It's a good conference to attend. This year it's in Daytona, October 24th to 26th. I just wanted to throw that out there so everybody knew about that. And that's all we've got. Thank you very much.
That was good, and if you, what I'd like to do is bring it back to the board, because I know that we have a lot of questions, and then I was sitting here and saying how, I know we have people that want to ask questions. What I think I'll do is for the citizens, after the board speaks, since we are running against the time for the council, if you would like to come up to the microphone and ask a question, Richard, Lorraine, and Jeff will write down your question, and those will be answered at tomorrow night's charrette. So I know you have questions.
We're not invited to that charrette.
We're not. No, we're gonna talk now.
Well,
They're
should the
gonna-
board decide how we want to do public comment?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it.
You
So,
do, but I don't. I would like to hear the questions and hear the answers.
The question becomes, how do we hear the answers then?
Well, the answers will be either published, there'll be minutes taken. But the questions, what we want to do is ask our own questions.
I don't agree with the public input part of it in the question. I think we need to vote on how we,
Well, we have a council meeting scheduled at 7 o'clock at 55 minutes. So as chairman, it is my job to keep the council, the board, and everything running smoothly. If we had an hour allocated, we'll take our hour.
I don't agree with it. So let's, if that's the way you would like to handle it as the chairman, that's fine. But I think it's a board decision.
Okay, well then we can, I'll tell you what, let the board ask the questions first. Let's see, I know that we have, everybody has an armload of questions. Go ahead, board.
We're starting that. I just have a couple of questions. What are the consequences for not following the rules?
There's the $100,000 question. There are no established penalties for not following the rules. Essentially what happens is, usually it's the auditor general who will come forward and say something's been done inappropriately here and respond to this. I know you all did not experience the auditor general comment forward in doing it, but it's usually that, and then amends need to be made so that all parties are satisfied. There's always the potential that the auditor general could say something went wrong and forward that somewhere else and move forward. Essentially what ends up happening though is the worst that's gonna happen is you're gonna be ordered to repay. And in all reality, the negative press from it is gonna be the worst comeback. I mean, everybody will lose a certain amount of face with certain things and that, I mean, that's pretty harsh losing that sort of face, so. But again, there's no established, okay, you violated the law, so you're gonna pay a 10% penalty. It could go to the court system, the courts could make a determination of something that needs to happen if somebody files suit. I mean, there's different avenues, but they're not defined.
If the TIF goes backwards, the tax rate goes backwards as it has been doing, you don't fall below the base here, do you?
Right, you cannot be in a position where you owe money.
It just always comes down to
You'll just hit zero and there'll be no contribution that year.
Then you have to have all the money allocated every year.
Yes.
So the projects actually have to be performed each year, or planned over a 3-year period and approved each year. What's the process for, and I think you can modify it anywhere you want along the way to add or subtract projects from it. So you could have a specific project that comes up, but then you've got to go through the longer process of modifying the plan. You can't just
Correct. And you have to go through the process, much like you'll be going through soon, to host all these public meetings before your CRA board, your planning and zoning board, the city council to approve those changes, notify taxing authorities, publish in the newspaper the different steps and when it will happen.
So what kind of plan, what kind of lead time are you talking if you have to modify a plan?
It depends on how quickly you want to do it. It's not a good idea to do it really quickly, but I've done it within I think a 30-day period. Generally, when you move forward with a modification, I would suggest you're gonna hit about 2 to 3 months to make sure that you give the public the appropriate opportunity, to make sure that you don't miss deadlines on newspapers. There was one I was working for city myself before I was with the firm, where the newspaper failed to print it in a timely manner, and that causes great problems. So you want to have plenty of built-in time there.
Okay. And can't pay for general government operating expenses, that one kind of, I guess you explained it pretty well, I'm just not sure I understand where the line is drawn. The CRA can technically hire its own staff and do its own work and have its own maintenance division if it wanted to. That could all be done within the district, but that would have to be out of CRA funds.
It could also, as I mentioned, if the city has those divisions and allocates personnel to do work for the CRA, it could then
Is that more like
keep
a
track of that
contract?
time and charge it back.
Do you actually have a formal contract or agreement with the city to do that?
It's not a requirement, however, it's excellent practice to do so. Anytime that there's an exchange of funds between the city and the CRA, it's best to have a memorandum of understanding that says, here's what's being paid for and here's the amount that's being paid for.
And you pay for that based on an hourly rate?
That's usually the way that it happens.
Is that a loaded rate?
It's whatever is appropriate and everybody agrees is appropriate.
Okay, so you can set the rate, you can include taxes, insurance, retirement, overhead.
As long as you can justify it.
Administrative overhead,
As long as you can
as long as
justify
you
it.
can justify it. For example, if it takes Mr. Crowdy an extra hour a month to oversee and manage this timekeeping system that's specific to the CRA, he could include that cost of that hour per month in the hourly rate.
Theoretically, that could happen, yes. And the best way I tell people about these sort of things in documentation is, assume you're the auditor who's gonna come in and see these things. What information are you looking for to justify an expense you know nothing about? $500 got spent on something. Now, show me what documents I wanna see to justify that to me, who knows nothing at all about it. And I always tell everyone that the best thing in the world you can do is have the satisfaction of the auditor before they've stepped in your office. Because you don't want them to keep digging and digging and digging because something's clearly wrong there. You want them to come forward and say, what's this $500 about? Oh, okay, here's the memorandum on why we paid that $500. Here's the agenda item that would be for both the city and CRA outlining what we were spending and why we were doing it, and it's referenced back to the redevelopment plan. And then that auditor is gonna go, okay, thanks, that's all, and they're not gonna ask anything about any other expenditure, because they've been satisfied that you're doing it right.
So you can really do it on a time and material or a fixed fee basis as long as you can document how you calculate it.
As long as you can justify that expense and you're satisfied with it. What I normally tell communities when I give the same presentation is talk to your attorney. Because if something goes wrong, your attorney's the one who has to back you up on it. So whatever makes your attorney happy as justification should be what makes you happy as justification.
Okay. Good answer. Thank you. I think that's.
I'd like to follow up on that just real quickly on the level of service, so there's an understanding. There have been cases, and we've managed CRAs, where within the district, there has been, because of success and activity and tourism and things like that, there have been situations where the level of service the city provided for code enforcement or lifeguards or things like that was flatlined. But because of the success, all of a sudden you needed more code enforcement, more garbage pickups, more lifeguards. The CRA helps and cover those costs, and that's another interlocal agreement that you do over and above. So it's not like you could pay for all the security for the events. You would look back and say the city over time has paid for X amount of security. However, because of the success of the redevelopment district, there's an additional cost now. The CRA can cover those if you document it properly. or if you need more lifeguards or more code enforcement or.
Often what's been provided elsewhere in the city is your baseline.
You're gonna have a baseline first to show what is the typical,
And it's easy to go back and check through budgets and things like that, so.
And if you're providing the additional service, you have to clearly show where it's provided only in the CRA.
okay, thank you.
Dave? I have a couple, a follow-up with Ed's reimbursement for city expenses. Have we done that in the past with CRA? Like, I guess technically we could charge for the maintenance for the Pelican Park as a CRA district. Have we done that in the past? I don't think we have.
Look, I'll get back to you on that, I want to make sure we give you the correct information, but there have been reimbursements for, in the past for administrative services that were provided by city hall staff based upon a portion of the time they worked in the CRA. But I can get you that specific information. I know a number of the funds, stormwater and the like, reimbursed for maintenance, but I'm not aware that CRA gets the information.
And then since you also do need to be careful, if the city has been paying for it, you can't suddenly decide it's time for the CRA to pay for it. Because you've kind of already established it as a general operating expense because the city has been paying.
Even though it was established several years ago as a CRA district.
Right, if the city's already been doing it, they've kind of established, they took that responsibility on, it's their respect.
A great presentation. There's several things on here. I know that your firm is gonna come up with a new plan for us, an updated plan that 10 years old or something. And I think some of your comments were that, you know, it'll be much improved, and maybe some of the things that were lacking in the original document, maybe will be changed or updated. Some of these things you mentioned, the analogy used, the economic benefit for a property, the value, those type of things. The incentives for inducements for the private sector, business attractions, those type of things. I'm real interested in that. Are you gonna have that part of your CRA plan, or is that gonna be something separate, or how do we get some information to go forward with some of those things?
Normally, if it's the intent to offer incentive of some kind, you would allocate in your plan that the CRA will fashion a program of incentives to attract business. And then you would create policies outside of your CRA plan to say exactly how you're going to do that. Because you do need to avail yourself of flexibilities if the market changes, if there's different things you want to do. So you're covered enough by giving the great statement, we are going to consider and we may offer incentives for this purpose, without defining what that incentive is going to be. And then, again, like I said, you adopt further a policy that says, if somebody comes forward with this type of thing, we'll be willing to do it. And, you know, that's an easily modified thing as the program progresses.
As the board decides that we mold it. Okay, thank you.
Well, Jeff, you certainly know your stuff. Now it's an outstanding brief. I tell you, I wish you would have been here 10 years ago. I think your stated best practices that you said a couple of times, I think we would have got to where we are. And I appreciate y'all's help getting us out of this. Couple of questions though. Has there ever been a case in the state where citizens whose money has been misappropriated or misused ever sued a CRA?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it has happened, but I'm not aware of where that was.
Yeah, I think it has too, but I don't know the outcome. That was going to be my next question. What was the outcome?
Yeah, and I couldn't answer that question.
Part of the plan, you speak of the plan, and obviously that's a big thing you're helping us out with, if not the major thing. Shouldn't part of the plan be, and I didn't see it up there, but shouldn't part of the plan be specific steps to correct the original problem that stood the CRA up in the first place? Shouldn't there be a specific set plan to do that?
I wouldn't advocate for that in the plan, because that may be a little bit of a moving target on how you're going to address some of those issues. If the community so desire to put something in the plan that steps will be taken to correct anything that may have happened in the past, that's fine. But if you're, one of the problems is you don't want to be too specific in your plan about things because it ties your hands.
No, I'm with you on the specificity, but it seems to me that if you're standing up an organization to take care of a specific problem, that we had to go to the state and say, hey, we have this problem, that's why we want to stand up to CRA. It seems to me that there needs to be some sort of a plan within the plan to take care of that problem.
And if there's something that's appropriate to put in there, we'll certainly listen to the voice of the board and the council as well as the public. One of the things I want to reiterate, because I love saying this when I'm here, we're not writing your plan, we're compiling what you want in your plan. Very, very important to me.
Well, we're gonna talk tomorrow, but I want to solve the problem that started the CRA in the first place. It'd be nice.
If that's something that everybody agrees should be in there, certainly that's our job to make sure that it's there.
Yeah, so
And
I
we're
would-
definitely gonna accomplish that one way or another. If we can't find a way to put it in the plan according to the statutes, we will figure out an appendix or an attachment, or we'll figure out a separate instrument that we can all adopt that
There
will
we go.
address that.
Now we're talking, good. Okay,
Again, it's your plan. What makes you all comfortable is what's going to be in there.
I want to fix the original problem. Okay. And lastly, your last slide up there that said, why a CRA? You had, I don't know, 5 or 6 bullets. I went through those real quickly, and I have to ask the question, which one of those bullets, or which one of the multiple bullets, does a CRA do that a city council, or I'm sorry, a city staff can't do on their own? It seemed to me that a city staff could do each and every one of those items, and you wouldn't have to have the overhead of a CRA or another bureaucracy.
Well, one of the most important things to a CRA is the funding source, because it's not just the city putting it. Essentially, it's a way to ensure that the county is reinvesting in the community as well, because it gets benefited by it. The idea behind the CRA is that it's an investment in your community. It's not an expenditure, it's an investment. If everything's going well, your actions enhance the value of your community. So the taxing authorities are reaping those benefits by increased taxable values.
Okay, that wasn't explained, so please explain that real quickly, because I think there's some folks out there who don't understand that. Where does the county money come in?
As I mentioned, the increment, it's based on that extra taxes paid both to the city and to the county from that base year. That's that extra $100. That $100 is divided up between whatever the city may account for based on their millage and the county accounts for.
So that's just not city taxes.
That's not just city taxes. It comes back. And the best way to look at it is you've written a plan of things that you want. And you've essentially said, we're going to allocate some money. And essentially, I don't like necessarily using this word, but it sort of forces the county to match your money to a certain extent. So it's almost like in most instances, I don't know how the county's millage stacks up to the cities.
About 60/40.
60/40.
Yeah,
So
a little bit higher than that, but it's like.
it's like getting a
60,
grant
30%.
of that amount from the county to match your money to do things that benefit them, because again, the idea behind your projects, whether they're quality of life enhancements or direct value enhancements, they enhance the value of the taxable value of the community. Because of that, additional taxes are raised. The original thought behind tax increment is, and it goes to what happened in North Carolina. North Carolina has this process, and they call it self-funded financing bonds. The idea is you borrow money, you make an improvement. The improvement increases values. You use the increased taxes off those increased values to pay back the money you borrowed. Now, the option here is not to borrow and do it on a pay-as-you-go. But that's really the theory behind increment financing, is that you're using future revenues to pay for what increased those future revenues.
Okay, so in effect, we are, by having a CRA, we are being allowed to use the money of county taxpayers who don't have a CRA. In other words, if, let's say there's a city out there that doesn't have a CRA, they're paying county taxes, we get to use a percentage of their taxes.
It's the residents within that.
Okay,
It's
so it's just the
based on the
residents.
values in the district. So it's essentially the taxes being paid by the people in the district that are coming back to the district. And it's only that increased value. So there's already a base value the county's collecting and the city's collecting that it's working on. It's an increased value over the start of the CRA that's coming back to pay for the projects the CRA is doing.
Thank you.
A lot of you have been to the Diplomat on Hollywood Beach, right? The big hotel there? That was a total demolition, and we started from square right there beginning. That project was $1 billion building, believe it or not. The tax increment we were receiving was like, on the property alone, was like $300,000. Once that building was complete, we went up to $1.5 million worth of collection, and that included the county money too. That money then was now used to pay off all the infrastructure we had to put in place to track that hotel, the water, the sewer, the drainage, and all those things. And that was the incentive to get them to rebuild on Hollywood Beach. But look what it did with the money coming in, and then as that continued in the future, we paid off all our debt. with that money that was coming in. So we went from $300,000 worth of taxes to $1.5 million that then was used to pay back all the investment that we put in and pay off any debt we had.
And it's important to note in that case too, it was also used to expand the broad walk in Hollywood along the beach and to make other improvements in other areas. It wasn't just limited to that site. So everybody in the district there benefited by that happening and those additional things being able to be put in throughout the beach area.
And the county was happy with their investment because they were getting bed tax dollars. It was a huge amount of money. They were very happy. So it was a win-win for everybody there.
And it's one of the most important things to think about is that, and I think I've said this to you all before, is that you need to look at any expenditure by the CRA as an investment. And your question should be, what's the return on our investment? What do you expect for this expenditure? And you should have expectations.
That's, want to make sure I understand it. So, we all understand it. So really what we're doing is shaving off a part of the city's operating budget and devoting it to redevelopment and then getting the county to match that money. But that money's not available, that growth in tax rate's no longer available to the city either. It's only available to the redevelopment agency.
That's correct.
That's correct.
So if there's other needs in the city, those funds are no longer there for the city.
Right, but one of the things I also often remind people of is the idea of the CRA is you've stopped it from getting worse. You find that there's blight there and that there's something going wrong and it's affecting the city and it's affecting values and it's affecting the quality of life. And you've stopped that by doing these projects in the CRA. So
Get it back to my question.
you're not losing.
What happens when the revenue goes backwards? And then you don't have the revenue to pay the obligations. I mean, is that something that typically take into consideration? I don't know how much our base has gone backwards here. I know it's gone backwards quite a bit. We borrowed money. Are we still gonna be able to generate? Because even that project down there, if that project fails, it doesn't matter if they go into bankruptcy in that hotel. I know they're not. But if they go into bankruptcy, then you don't have the revenue from anybody to offset the loan.
Well, the important thing with that loan is what's the backing to the TIP revenue there. Is it some revenue of the
Something
city?
else.
Is it not? Because the statute's clear that the obligation of the CRA is the obligation of the CRA. And if your TIP goes to zero, well then people who lend you money have to wait until there's money.
Yeah, but it all comes back on the taxpayer.
They have no, well, they have no recourse against anything except the redevelopment trust fund.
They don't have any recourse against the city that it sits in?
No. It's a separate, distinct entity. Their recourse is against the redevelopment trust fund. So if the redevelopment trust fund has nothing, there's nothing they can collect until there's money in the redevelopment trust fund.
So why would they lend you money in this economy?
Well, and that's why a lot of times there's secondary backing. And a lot of cities will pledge utility revenues or some other pledge so that the lender is comfortable doing it. There's some that will say, if you're buying a piece of property, for instance, they'll take the land as the secondary pledge. Because one of the things that the CRA can do that a city can't is it can hold a mortgage and it can take a mortgage.
Mr. Crowder, do we have any secondary backing on our CRA debt? No?
So are you, I'm sorry, sir, but so are you telling me that if our 5.3 or whatever it is, $1 million debt right now that we have in our CRA, is it 5.3 or 3.8? It's 5 something. Anyway, a lot of $1 million of debt. If the CRA was to default on that debt today, that 5.4 million payback on that note would not fall on the citizens of Satellite Beach?
No, it's the only pledge. Again, if you have a secondary pledge in there, I'm not talking
But
about
we
a
don't.
secondary pledge. If you don't, the claim is against the redevelopment trust fund and the assets of the CRA.
What happens if the CRA is shut down?
Then those default become the parent organizations when the CRA goes away. If you can't default it by making the CRA go away. You can't eliminate the CRA and say, okay, we don't have to pay that back.
So, okay, let me get this straight. This is very interesting. So it's almost like a corporation kind of a thing. I mean, you're a corporate entity, like the term. So, and I'm playing lawyer here, Jim, so hang with me. If the CRA, that's a dirty word, if the CRA sticks around and you're sitting on 5 point whatever $1 million worth of debt and you decide we're done, we're not gonna pay it, but we maintain the CRA, we're okay? It's not gonna fall back on the citizen?
it's not gonna fall back on the citizens, but there's a claim against your trust fund. If you keep collecting money in the trust fund, it's gonna happen. If you drag it out to the point where the CRA no longer exists, again, the city is then acquires the assets and liabilities at the end of the CRA. So ultimately, it will be, but there's no immediate.
Eventually it gets to the taxpayer.
If you were to solve it permanently,
The reality is, though, your lender cannot force the city to raise a millage so that the CRA has more money to pay them back. If there's no money in the trust fund, they wait.
So the bottom line is that if the funds coming in because of the reverse tax states fall down to only being able to pay half of the bill every year for the interest and mortgage payments, the CRA only has to pay half of it every year, but interest continues to accumulate or in default status, and all those penalties associated with the default continue to add up. And at the end of the life, then it all turns over to the city. So it's never really a default situation, it's just a delay situation for the bank. And they've ultimately got a taxpayer something in the end, is that right?
Ultimately, that is the way that.
So even if the tax rate goes backwards, it falls below the base rate. The city at some point in time, in our case, 30 years now, day zero, will become liable for this debt.
Yeah, they would inherit a liability.
Well, I thought it was a great presentation. Is it possible to have that put on our webpage?
Certainly, yeah. You've got a copy of it. It's there for whatever you would like to do.
And then a lot of my questions were answered, and I appreciate your time. I know that there's other tasks that you've been tasked with, and I would like to remind this board that we didn't create CRA. We're stuck with the CRA. So, anyway, I'd like to hear what the public has to say, and I'd like to also get the response to their questions in writing.
I just have a couple of questions. When we wrote airport master plans, we did a 5, 10, 20-year plan. The CRA master plan is just one with updates or no updates?
Well, again, if you say within 5 years we're gonna do this, well, you're gonna do it within 5 years, you don't have a choice otherwise.
So you don't think it should be updated? See, I think one of the reasons that we're in the position we did is we didn't really look at it for 10 years. Items have changed, we incorporated Hightower Beach, we have other areas that are kind of like in the CRA, but we're not mentioned in the plan. So how do you update the plan? You have to go through the whole kit caboodle every 5 years?
What I think, you know, our team will come up with a recommendation that we'll include in your plan that'll suggest you need to make sure that you watch your plan, and then at minimum, every 5 years, you should make a review of it to determine whether you need to modify and update. And it's a suggestion in the plan itself that you need to keep your eye on this. You don't necessarily have to define yourself as having that expense every 5 years of updating it. You may not need it. But you should certainly.
One other question, I know you talked about specifics. We had a specific come up a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about mast arms on Shearwater. When the CRA was developed in 2002, Shearwater didn't exist. So it came up, and I think you said we wanted to use CRA funds for that, but said it's not in the plan. How do you handle something that is developed after the plan is developed and but it's in the CRA?
Well, certainly, I believe your plan addressed the doing mast arms. So you would keep it general enough to say that the CRA may, and there's going to be a lot of may in there because you don't want to tie your hands and say you have to do it. But the CRA may choose to allocate funds to or pay in total for mast arm installation throughout the district, period.
Okay, so if we wanted to make like our crossing handicap equipped, we would say the one by Publix, we would just say that we want to make all of our street crossings, or we may do that, and that would cover the city?
Absolutely, that's where I was talking about. You say you want to replace the furniture in the council chambers, that's going to cover the chairs, the podium, you know, the dais, microphones, it'll cover everything. But at the same time, you get to be specific enough when it's time to do that and allocate, and say on your agenda item, if you're doing this, on page 54, it says we'll do mast arms throughout the CRA. And that's why we justify doing this one at this location.
Okay, that sounds good.
And go ahead. So this particular thing at Shearwater, it's kind of half in and half out of the CRA. One side of the street's in the CRA, the other side of the street's not. Parks, from my look at the map, the parks in the CRA, but the other side of the street's not, right?
And A1A is in the CRA.
So you mentioned that we could do stuff throughout the city, but I also thought you said earlier that we can only do stuff outside the CRA if it's a logical consequence somehow connected to something we did in the
Yeah,
CRA.
again, when that time comes, you're gonna wanna talk to your attorney and say, is this justified? You're gonna back this up when somebody says this isn't right.
So with this particular thing, if we put mass arms, they have to go across the street on the non-CRA property, we can make a finding that it's somehow connected to the mast arm on the other side of the street.
Yeah, it would certainly be great to put in your backup material that you found that this may extend to outside the CRA boundary, however.
We've done that in many CRAs. For instance, the Intercoastal Bridge, when you get to Hollywood Beach, was in part in the CRA and part not. And we were able to justify that it was the gateway into the CRA, and they covered the cost for the improvement to the bridge and so forth. A mast arm, a signalization, where the infrastructure is placed, the idea is to make that intersection safe within the CRA. I think that's an easy one to justify. We have trolleys that go from one CRA district to the downtown. We've been able to justify that that was to improve businesses in the CRA district, even though the trolley operated outside of the CRA. So there are those tangent things that you can justify as part of the project.
The point is, I said justified, whenever we consider a project like that, if we want to approve it, we also have to have in that approval the rationale as to why it's connected. You can't signalize having a street. Or we have to modify the CRA to bring that into it.
Actually, one of the most interesting things that happens is a lot of people not understanding how the CRA operates will establish their CRA and put the legal description to say, down the center of the right of way. And so, if you do it down the center of the right of way and you have a median in that road, and you decide that you want to do the landscaping on that median, how do you do it? And the answer is, the city pays half, the CRA pays half. That's the way it's happened in a lot of instances.
One of our last clients, we knew that this was gonna be an issue, and when we did the boundary survey for the CRA, we went 15 feet beyond each intersection. So we would include the intersection at each point to make sure that we didn't run into this.
That's what I was gonna suggest, if you look over ours, if you recommend whether or not we need to extend the CRA across the street. Is a minimum to add it so that we can work on both sides, because technically we could landscape on the CRA side, but we couldn't landscape on the non-CRA side.
I think you could landscape it, it would just be who paid for what, that's.
Yeah, no, I
right,
understand
yeah. And look, I don't wanna split hairs over the mast arm, we voted the meeting before that not to do the mast arms along the corridor, and then we brought up one mast arm because we were gonna get a benefit, a contribution to it, so we're nitpicking over things, we need to modify this plan and move forward.
All right.
And I do have, one other question about our gym, Pelican Beach Park. I know that we paid, actually, we took out a line of credit to pay for the construction of the park, $2.5 million. And it was transferred to the city. Technically, does that have to be transferred to the CRA? It is in the CRA. The CRA paid for the improvements.
That, not necessarily.
Okay.
Again, a lot of times the CRA will make an improvement and transfer ownership to the city because we're out of it. But they certainly shouldn't be maintaining it if they don't own it. In that instance, and you need to be clear when you do those sort of projects, that long-term relationship of who owns, who pays, what happens. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with the CRA paying for it and then turning ownership over.
The county owned it and then they just transferred it to us,
There's no problem.
to the city.
And
Sorry, not to
in
the
most
CRA.
instances where CRAs are making improvements in public spaces, they don't own the public space. The city, the county, the state owns it. But it's certainly within the statute, they're allowed the right to make those improvements.
All right, at this time, I would like, it is 7:30, but I would like to hear your questions. I'll ask Richard, Jeff, and Lorraine to write them down. The board says they've been asked not to attend tomorrow night, but you can certainly attend. It is not illegal for you to go to the charrette. So I would ask if you have a question. I know Dale has a question, and I'm sure a lot of you have questions, and then they can research and tomorrow night's plan. You are not going to rehash this plan. This is not going to be presented tomorrow night.
No.
Tomorrow night is strictly Q&A.
We'll
Did
do a
look from
Q&A.
everybody, taking a look at some of the sites, talking about some things that work and don't work, and some things that for the future.
Okay, so I'd ask, if you could come up and just state your name and ask your question, that would be great. And then it'll be researched by CGA, and get back to you. Please, so,
Those has to be right.
your answers could be in writing. Does somebody take notes for you, or, Mike, how do we do that on the charrette? Is there somebody that records it?
Are you talking about now or tomorrow?
Tomorrow. I know tonight we are,
Mr. Mayor, I was just gonna suggest, I think there are some people here who came to actually ask questions and get an answer
Well,
tonight,
let's-
who might not be able to be there tomorrow.
okay, let's get all the questions and let's see what.
And if it's a short answer, maybe they can just.
Yeah, let's
Like
get
to
all
do
the questions.
that.
Let's take all the questions, and then if we got some time, we'll do that, right? Okay. Skip? Is that okay?
Good evening, Skip Bollinger, 400 Kale Street. I've got a few questions that I can wait till tomorrow night to hear the answer of. You mentioned that CRA can sell property at fair value. You mentioned your ice cream stand as an example, that after the ice cream stand is there, it's worth $40,000 to the city, but we're gonna knock it off and we're gonna sell it to the new owner for $1,000 to entice them to come in and add the value. My question is, what did we pay for that land in the first place, and who eats the write down? Okay, next question. The CRA can borrow money with approval of the council, and you went through a list of types of money or types of borrowing, for lack of a better term, instruments. My question is that the council can authorize the CRA to borrow the money absent referendum. What about Article 7, Section 12A in the Florida Constitution, which very specifically states any debt that is intended to be paid off by ad valorem tax revenues that lasts for over a year, which is considered long-term debt, must go before the people for a referendum. Now, contrary language in 163 notwithstanding, a CRA statute, a Florida statute, does not trump the language of the Constitution. So my question is, I'd like that to be addressed tomorrow night. Another question, in the event that there is a beef between, this is unlikely when it's the same people sitting on the same board. In the other scenario where the city council creates the CRA and appoints others to sit on the panel, somewhere down the road, there is a beef. The city took back some money from the CRA lockbox and used it for a legitimate purpose, but not a legitimate CRA purpose. And CRA wants the money back. City says, we're not gonna pay you that money back. The question is, who gets Mr. Beadle? Since he is representing, I'm guessing that in normal circumstances, Mr. Beadle would certainly represents the city, but wouldn't he not also represent the CRA absent some conflict within the city itself? The question, and this goes back to the original reason for being for the CRA back to 2001, was the non-conforming lots. How was the CRA intended to correct those non-conforming lots in the first place? Absent taking ownership of those lots and consolidating, putting them together, it would seem to me that the city, absent the CRA, could entice those non-conforming lot owners to work out some mutual agreement between themselves for one to buy the other out and make the lots larger and redefine them that way. Question, if the county can afford to rebate their share of the TIF to the CRA, it didn't need that money to do its legitimate functions in the first place. Why are we laundering money through the county? Why is it being collected from us through the county? And then, oh, you guys got a CRA, we'll give you this much back. That means they didn't need it to do their police, fire, whatever they do in the county. One more question. What are Satellite Beach's CRA's outstanding projects and the status of those projects? In other words, how far do we have to go before we get to the end of the road with this thing? We can put a stake through its heart, stuff it back into Pandora's box from whence it came, and let the city do the things which the city could do absent the CRA anyway. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Other citizen questions?
Mayor Fonte, can I ask you a question?
Yes,
Is there a time limit? Because you-
Not on the questions, which is not answered.
I'm done.
Thank you.
Dale Abrams, 620 Ocean Street. I wanna make sure I understand this. Those people who live in the CRA district pay the additional taxes to create the CRA? The money, the people that live in the CRA, does that money help with the CRA as far as that's concerned?
That's correct. You're not paying additional, you're paying your.
I'm
normal
paying
tax
more,
bill.
if you're paying more money, no, okay.
The same tax bill you would pay, that money, instead of going to the city, stays in your district to pay for improvements.
To pay for improvements, okay.
There's no higher tax rate for your house than a house outside the district.
So if my property value goes up, then the CRA benefits, correct?
And your taxes go up.
And my taxes go up.
But they would.
That's gonna happen to you either way, whether it's a CRA or
If
not.
your value goes up whether there's a CRA or not, it doesn't go up any more or any less because there's a CRA.
I'm still trying to understand how someone who lives on the ocean is considered blighted.
Other questions? Can you guys answer that one tomorrow night, please? Other questions for tomorrow? Carol, come on up.
Well, that's part of
Hi.
Hi, Carol Robichek, 560 Peakwood. I don't know if you can answer it, but I would really like to know tomorrow, how much money during this past year has the county given to the CRA? What exactly is it, the amount that we owe? How much of the city money goes there? So we have some idea of what the working budget is that we're talking about. Does that make sense? And is it doable?
And that's something we can answer. Like you all have that information.
Mr. Karate can provide you with that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be really nice. Thank you.
Okay, we have that. Other questions? All right, I thank you. I'll bring it back to the board for any last minute questions, comments, criticisms, critiques. Anything, Dave?
I just have one, but I know that it's not by law we can attend the charrette, but the consultant did recommend that we not do that. And again, could you just go over the reasons why?
We often recommend that you not be there so that people do not feel influenced. We usually ask these not happen at City Hall, just so that nobody feels intimidated by anything or is afraid of who's in the room. It truly is an opportunity for the residents to speak their mind freely and openly without worrying about who's there to hear. We will certainly, it's not our job to take the input of any one resident and tout it, but to take the conglomeration of what everybody says and interpret it for you to give you back your plan.
So where are the one-on-ones gonna be held?
We're doing that now.
So we are doing
Those are
those
happening.
here.
Today and tomorrow.
All right, thank you, and we just have to do the adoption of minutes for the Community Redevelopment Board.
like to make a motion that that the board adopts the minutes of the April 4th Community Redevelopment Agency Board minutes. And April 18th.
All right, I have a motion by Board Member Billman and Board Member Kinberg. Lenore?
So now, let me clarify, am I supposed to call council members, CRA board members?
No, yes, we will be all board members.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, CRA board member David Allison,
Yes.
um,
You don't have to say CRA. Just learn the
board
CRA.
member Keenan,
Yes.
board member Kenberg,
Yes.
board member Billman,
Yes.
board member Rhodes,
Yes.
and board member Alonso.
Yes, and the motion does pass unanimously. I'd like to ask you, we're going to take a 5-minute break as we transition. Board meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, guys.